All right. Welcome everyone to the April 20th JupyterLab weekly call. Today, we currently have 15 people on, but I bet more people will show up. And if you just joined the call, please check out the meeting minutes in the chat and add your name to the attendees if you like, and add a bullet point in the agenda if there's something you'd like to talk about. If you have something to talk about that will take more than roughly 5 minutes, please add it at the bottom to the additional discussion section so that we can spend more time on it at the end of the call. And before this call ends, I will stop the recording in case there are short announcements that you want to make that don't belong posted in perpetuity. With that, let's get started. So the first person on the agenda today is Isabella.
Yeah, Isabella, who's still laughing at Nick's pun. But yeah, anyway, hi. Good day, whatever time it is for you. I just have my usual kind of announcements. One, last week we were like, where are the recordings for these meetings? How do we get them to be places where they are actually kept? They're all on YouTube now, I think, up to today, obviously. So I don't know that we have a process that we want to do for that in the future. It's not a hard thing. It's just very manual. So just bringing that up is, I don't know what we want to do again. Doing it in a batch wasn't too bad, but I don't know. I don't know what else to say. I'm just pointing out that this will be a problem again in the future. But for now, there is something happening. So yeah, that's cool. We also have April's Jupyter community call next week. It's at a slightly different time. I'm assuming slightly earlier for most people because we're trying to dodge various still daylight savings meetings have converged and removed all normal windows that we've had for Jupyter community calls in the past. I'm trying to resolve this long term. I don't know what to do, honestly, just so you know. So this upcoming one will probably be painful for anyone in Pacific time, but hopefully that's still good for everyone else. I know we get a lot of people in time zones where it's later, so I figured it was better to go a little earlier. But yeah, we have that. And of course, if you haven't heard about this, sorry, my usual spiel. It's like a show and tell and celebration of things across the Jupyter community. You can share anything you want, something you've made, something other people have made. That's my kickoff. Ask me for more questions if you want. And finally, the JupyterLab accessibility meeting will take place 15 minutes after this one. Yes, I don't think I have more to say about that. Everyone is also welcome there. So yeah, thanks. Any questions?
What time Pacific, let's say, is the community call?
It's at 7 a.m. Pacific now.
Okay.
So
cool.
Yeah, we have so many people on time zones where I know it's the end of their day. I didn't want to move it later, but I don't think I will be great at 7 a.m. every month. And I don't know if we want to, not have any Pacific people there likely to be there for the foreseeable future. So actually I'll paste that. I have a poll on Twitter right now if there's like a cadence thing that we should change. Like, I don't know, we've been having like some months where things are really packed and some where they aren't. So I was seeing, I'll link that. Yeah.
Cool, thanks. Frederic, you are up next.
Hey everybody, so lots of announcements on my side. We did a release of patch version for 3.3. I'm still merging lots of backward PR for 3.4. The latest that's missing is a cell toolbar because as it's introducing new packages, I was waiting for that one to be the latest before releasing. Should come. I'm still fighting with some update of snapshot. Hopefully I will do that by tomorrow, I think. Then another announcement we have discussed like 2 weeks ago, I think, that we need a specific discussion about introducing the toolkit in JupyterLab. There's going to be a discussion this Friday on April 22 I hope the time is correct. I think it's correct. It's 8:30 a.m. Pacific time, but I linked the event so that everybody can check in this time zone what's the correct time. So that's all for the announcement. And also last week we discussed about Markdown parser, and probably first step for that discussion is to get some reference test for that. So I started a PR on the JupyterLab benchmark repository. For now, I'm downloading the test suite from GitHub Flavor Command Mark, and I'm testing those tests against NB-convert and JupyterLab renderer. Most of them are failing, but yeah, that's for a start. And I put the same bullet points for discussion because if we have time, I think we could discuss that a bit more, but it's gonna take more than 5 minutes. So I'm stopping there.
This is really helpful. So I think maybe I think the lowest common denominator that came out of last week's Markdown conversation was, at the bare minimum, even if we had no spec or anything, having a comprehensive test suite is really helpful. So thank you for working on this. Any comments before we move on? Okay. Nick, you are up. Is Nick on?
Hi. Yeah, I'm here. It's just, you know, I thought there was a lot of people from it. All right. So those of y'all that are watching along at home, if you've used the JupyterLab shared editing, collaborative editing experience, then you have been using probably been using the built-in document provider, which uses the Python-based WebSocket server that implements the WebRTC, or that implements the YJS protocol. There is another one called Y-WebRTC, and it allows you to use the WebRTC spec, which is a peer-to-peer spec that has a signaling server step up front. Basically, you don't have to give someone else the login to your Jupyter server, and you can still work on documents together. So 2 kernels, N kernels, whatever, things get kind of weird, but you don't have to share kernels if that's even possible in certain circumstances. We have wrapped that up inside of a package. We used to have it embedded inside of JupyterLite. We've now pulled that out. It doesn't import any JupyterLite stuff, so we're just going to do a release of it. And you know, if freaky people want to try and install it, they'll be able to. So it is a further adventure into the WebRTC and JupyterRTC infrastructure stuff that, you know, you can try out things now because it's modular. We don't have to wait for everything to land in core for things to be different. So I haven't deployed it yet, but looking forward to it. That is all.
Cool. Thank you. Can I ask a question not related to most of what you just said, but that you could answer? JupyterLite's pretty awesome. Can you make it a Jupyter project? Just think about it.
Yeah, that's fine. We don't care. It's not about ego. It's about damage control. And what we're concerned about is that, like, it's built on a nest of evolving web standards that happen to work today, right? We think they're going to keep working in perpetuity, but we don't really know. And, you know, as the experience with angry ass people that come in from try.jupyter.org and they're like, why did you break my beautiful baby? We're like, man, because, you know, Docker containers are really friggin' expensive, okay? You know, I'm sorry, right? Like, giving away free compute's really expensive. So there's levels of expectation of core Jupyter products that we do not really feel like Lite needs to, wants to, should yet fulfill. That is all. So nobody is claiming ownership on it. People are already building stuff on it. We just don't want to make it somebody else's problem yet, I guess is the issue. But
hey, that's totally fair. But just know when you're ready, you'll be welcome. How's that?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Gabriel, you are up.
Hello. So this is just real quick. I have been working on PR, and every time I've tried to push basically on this PR, I end up with running into this issue with the integrity script in the repo. And I don't know if anybody else has had any issues with this, but and I don't want to turn this into a troubleshooting session, but I just thought I would put it out there and see if anyone wants to sidebar with me or something, or I guess like one question I could have just for the group here is like, since I keep running into issues, nowadays I just kind of do git push no verify and let it GitHub handle it on the CI. If that's the correct thing to do, I'm happy to keep doing that. But anyway, just putting that out there.
To be honest, I removed the hook on push on my computer too, because I'm pissed by it. It takes lots of time just for pushing, and there is already the hook on the commit. So I don't see the point of waiting 2 times, couple of seconds, and sometimes minutes if it's a big PR. So I removed it.
Yeah, I run into issues. Oh, sorry, you go, Darian.
Oh, no, you go ahead, please, Alex.
Okay. I run into issues with integrity all the time, and I've just found like I use conda environments, so I just wipe my conda environment, start over. Almost always fixes it for me. That is a bit of a nuclear option, though, depending on how intrinsic your conda environment is.
It's funny you say that, because part of what motivated me to escalate this was like yesterday I was running into the same issue, and I was like, okay, just nuking my conda environment, starting from fresh, and I still ran into the issue. I was like, ah.
At that point, I'd do what Frederick does then.
Exactly. Anyway, thanks.
I was going to say there are circumstances where I use no verify. So for example, every time I rebase and want to push to my local fork, there's no reason to do pre-commit hook. I've just taken what I know has already been vetted and merged into the main repo. So yeah, don't feel bad about no verify. That's totally legit. But the fact that this is annoying you probably indicates it's annoying others who haven't said anything. So I hope we can make it less painful. I'm going to paste into the chat a script that relies on the say command on Mac OS, but you could remove that with a console log. But this is my nuke JupyterLab script from inside the folder that has my JupyterLab repo. And it does all the things, throws away all the old things, and so it does run a git clean. So be careful about that, because it does get clean that F. But this is what I run basically every time I'm starting some new PR. And then it takes 5 minutes on my computer. So I have that say command where my computer will remind me that it was doing something by speaking, which is kind of funny.
Can we paste that in the notes?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and we don't even run things with real compilers. The SciPy folks do crazy stuff, and they have 50 different scripts, and they are trying to consolidate all of those down into one unified developer workflow. So there is precedent for having something that can span multiple languages, that can take care of many of these things. I'm just saying.
All right. Wow. It looks like other people haven't added any agenda things before additional discussion. Is there perhaps anyone who was thinking about adding an agenda item, or we can jump into discussions if you like, but we're running ahead of schedule for change. Okay, that sounds like a no. All right. Jason, did you have this first?
Yeah, Actually, both of the things. So we postponed the iPad widgets discussion that I announced last week to this coming Tuesday, April 26th. All the information's there. I'm glad, William, you're happy. I think Pete's also able to be there then, so it should be a good discussion. And I'm going to PyCon US, if anybody else is going. I think a few people responded earlier. Happy to meet up with anybody. Let me know if you're going, and happy to chat.
So if there's a 10 a.m. iPy widgets demo that's interesting and people might want to come to, and there's a 7 a.m. community call, what do we have going on between 8 and 9? Maybe we can just fill the whole day up for, oh, there's a Jupyter
We have
security call.
Yeah.
Nice. All right.
And the iPad widgets dev meeting starts at 9:30. We're just taking that last half hour for Dawn. So
got it.
I think
Okay.
we have a morning of Jupyter if you'd like.
It looks like there's an empty half-hour slot. So yeah,
that's a good time for somebody to put in a discussion, because there'll be everybody there from previous calls to next call.
Well, if you're on the West Coast and you start at 7 a.m., maybe you want that half hour to eat something. So okay. Oh, I have lost my window that have the, oh, there it is. Okay, cool. Oh yes. Okay, so there's two words that hide a lot of conversation in the Markdown parser. But Jason, did you already ask about PyCon US?
Yeah, I just, if you want to meet up, put your name there, or some people have messaged me privately, happy to arrange and coordinate. And I should be there for the sprints. So that's the Monday and Tuesday after PyCon, and love to sprint with people on Jupyter stuff.
Cool, great. All right, we've got the words Markdown parser. I imagine that's going to fill up the next 38 minutes of conversation. So who wrote those two words? You can start the conversation.
I wrote them. Maybe I can start by showing what I did. Can you see my screen okay?
Yes.
Just bringing the chat. Okay, that's gonna be messy. So the guys from GitHub, they use a specific command mark GitHub flavor Markdown parser. And they are using a test suite that's displayed like as this text file, and basically they are extracting example from their here. So the file can be rendered directly, but it contains the test. So that's a test, and the test is always the same. You get the Markdown you want to test, and then a dot, and then you get the HTML you hope to get outside of it. And they provide a Python script to parse that to be able to extract just the test. So that's what I have used for creating the test. So back to the PR. So the test is based on PyTest. So what I'm doing is like I'm getting that GitHub repository, and out of them I'm extracting every test. And so I have created a couple of test files for now. I created one that's testing the Jupyter app renderer against the that reference GitHub. So the test is what's the result of what the app renderer is providing versus what's the test suite as a reference. Then there is the same thing about NB convert. I have a doubt if it's the right function because there are two of them. There is another one that's called Markdown to HTML doc. So I'm unsure if it's the right one, but that can be changed easily. So that's the same comparison. And the third test is comparing JupyterLab versus NB convert. So that's the three tests that you are getting. Everything is using Python, although for JupyterLab, what's happening is that I'm using Playwright. So Playwright is that it's Puppeteer, but like the next generation of it. So you can use it like the basic libraries in TypeScript, but there is a Python binding, and so that's what I'm doing. And basically, you can inject JavaScript to evaluate some stuff, and say, so that's what I'm doing for testing JupyterLab. I'm loading the render mime type plugin, and then I'm just creating a renderer, and I'm saying, okay, with the text I'm injecting from Python, just render it, and I'm returning the HTML from the node, and that's what I'm using for the comparison. So most of the tests are broken. That's the result of the test. That's not the latest test because I probably have skipped some stuff. Okay, this is the one. So the result is like pretty bad if I remember correctly. So out of like 2000 tests, there is only 700 passing. One of the main reasons for that, it's because both NB convert and in JupyterLab, when we get an heading, we're adding an ID and an anchor, what the reference is not doing. So there are lots of corner keys and stuff like that. So the main question is probably like, is it a very good test suite, or should we start building our own? And even for those things, like NB convert is not building the same link than JupyterLab. So there are questions also, what kind of comparison is valid, or what can be tolerated, what could be tolerated as a difference. So there are lots of questions, and this is still without any special equation and LaTeX stuff, because those are common Markdown, and I don't think they support math. So yeah, that's that's the stuff.
Do we support the GitHub flavored extensions?
Nope, we don't.
Not officially and not unofficially?
I don't think so.
We do tables.
Do we do images?
We do
fence code blocks. Things. Yeah.
But I don't think we have ever said that we are supporting every GitHub flavor of stuff and plus other stuff.
My question is, de facto, are we? I mean, since you're testing against the GitHub flavored Markdown instead of just plain standard common Mark, like, are we passing the GitHub flavored Markdown tests as well?
No, we are not.
Beyond just common Mark. Okay.
We are not, and most of them there are not so many additions for of the Git compared to the amount of tests that is provided by common Markdown. The GitHub flavor is maybe like 50 tests more out of 700, something like that. So not so much more, let's say.
So you mentioned that we are doing something in lab and also in NB convert. And that brings to mind an earlier conversation we were having about this. So as Notebook 7 comes out, it'll be doing the same with Markdown that JupyterLab is. And I think it presents a good opportunity for us to also make sure that NB convert does what Notebook and Lab do with Markdown, i.e. we have one Jupyter set of Markdown features that we support, whether that's defined in a spec, whether that's defined by a test suite, that, is a separate question. But it seems fairly straightforward that if Notebook and Lab are doing one thing, NB convert should be doing that same thing. I know this is easier to say than do, though, because NB convert doesn't currently render Markdown in JavaScript. But yeah, have you thought about this issue? Do you have any insight on that aspect of it? Because if you're going to go through the trouble of creating what you're working on right now, it would be really good if it applies to multiple Jupyter treatments of Markdown and not just the lab version.
So for now, I've used the Python version to be able to use NB convert and have the same infrastructure for JupyterLab. But as I'm using Playwright, basically, as soon as you can get any renderer that are JavaScript based inside the web page, you could use the same code or something similar to test another one. Like if we want to test Markdown it or stuff like that, it shouldn't be too complex to add to the list.
What do you, and by you, I mean all of you, not just Fred, what do you think, how do we get to a point where we decide what technologies we're using, i.e. what libraries, MIST, Markdown it, Marked, all the other things that are out there, right? And also at what feature set we support. Like basically, if we set it as one of our goals to establish some sort of beachhead for what we're doing with Markdown as a project, how do we get from where we are now to there?
I mean, this has come up in a number of occasions. We currently don't, we have MIME types everywhere, all over the place, but not for the source of our presentation cells. We fiat that they're Markdown, we fiat that they're whatever Markdown, right? But if we actually are going to say something, we would want to go get a MIME type for that, right? And it would be a more limited subset than MIST, because MIST is by design extensible, right? You can go download 50 things. So it would basically, I think to do this properly, we would need some, you can't require anything, but a baseline MIME type that describes some useful subset that we do run through suites like this. And there's nothing much we can do about that. Then we would need a way to document what those extensions are. And CommonMark still has not ratified a way for you to pass that information along with your document, right? So we, however, have this JSON file structure that allows us to do things like that. We can put metadata about any old thing that we want. So if at the top of your document in a blessed metadata spot inside of there, you said, here are the top level grammar rules or anything that are like, this is stuff that I'm going to do for Markdown. That's the only way we can make everybody happy, right? And I would even consider moving math out of that baseline and making that something that you have to require. It's very hard, right? Because math has been, the inline math markup has been part of the contract forever, as long as it's been Markdown. But it's so hard for us to transition anything as long as we don't give a place for people to declare stuff. So yeah, they got a link on, that is definitely not it. We talk a little bit about this on one of the issues, and it devolves into, on JupyterLab markup, where we've done a bunch of these things. It devolves into, you can't write a parser for Markdown, and nobody can really, you can't argue that, because you can't write a parser for a language that the intent is that you can never break it, right? It's always going to show you something. It's never going to fail parsing. It's not like LaTeX, where if you are missing a brace, you're done. You're out the game. Some people may prefer that kind of typesetting rigor in their notebooks. So if your notebook documented what is the source of my markdown cells, and that would be no longer accurate, it would not be a markdown cell, it would be a markup cell. That would give people that way that if you really care what your thing looks like at the end of the day, the only thing you can do is send that back to a server and have it, you know, laid out like that. You can't rely on the browsers to do this stuff for us, right? You have to make stupid dead pixel pictures. That's not the intent of many notebooks. They're not for publication. They're not for preprint, but some notebooks are. So I feel like trying to out-engineer and out-specify it, the entropy in the universe is not gonna win. That is me. I'm done.
So what about using a vendor MIME type? You don't have to go register that anywhere. You can put that as a placeholder where you start defining things. But having a MIME type, I don't really see how that gets us closer to having a coherent markdown approach. It seems like that's just completely orthogonal to how do we solve the, like, how do we actually make sure the Jupyter front ends all do the same thing, B, other people can reason about what a Jupyter notebook's doing, so when they're implementing their front ends, they also do the same thing. I would like to hear William opine about this, because you got to do this, right?
I think my comment's just the same as last time, which is that I try as much as possible to think from the user's point of view. And that means they have documents and they want them to look the same in a lot of different places so that the people who they give their documents to are happy. So as an example, GitHub flavored Markdown is a really cool thing called task lists. It's kind of like an enumerated list with little checkboxes. And I think it would be a great thing to have in Jupyter code cells as well. So my opinion is that there are certain extensions that I think would be very likely for our users to definitely want to have. It makes sense. You know, like you might want to put a to-do list in a homework assignment or some work you're doing. And then GitHub is pushed. There's other extensions that we've pushed really hard, like math formatting, which make a lot of sense for us. There's a cool extension that Nick mentioned last week, which is Mermaid.js, which is something that clearly makes a huge amount of sense for GitHub to have because it's really useful for technical documentation. But I don't think that it makes a lot of sense to invest a lot of energy in putting that in Jupyter. So I think that it would be really nice if, you know, there was some discussion and some, balance based on how Jupyter notebooks are different than, say, GitHub issues versus people writing books in Markdown. And you can make choices about which extensions should really be prioritized and encouraged for all Jupyter clients to have. That's my opinion, at least, for what it's worth.
What if it was something like, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
What I want to say is like, there is a technical issue, let's say, that you raised is like NB-convert is primarily a Python tool when the front end are web-based technology. So there are also, if we want to align them, that may not be as trivial as possible, like, because it's gonna be hard to get the same tools with the same set of plugins producing the same output.
Yeah, I'm a little scared of the test suite that project is proposing because, if you put a huge amount of effort into making sure all 5,000 tests pass, but then there's a really compelling reason to switch to Markdown it instead of marked or something. And it just like all the output looks different, but I mean, looks the same, but it's different HTML that produces it. That might be a strong disincentive for somebody to make that change to a different Markdown parser. So you kind of just have a test suite that forces you to not move forward. That would be a concern, but it might be easy to deal with that concern.
I think the alternative is we don't even know where we are, and
yeah,
even if we were a new project, this would be an entirely different conversation. But we've got millions and millions of notebooks out there that people assume work, and maybe at some level they realize they don't work the same across different renderers. But I think there's a broad assumption that things work, but nobody knows sort of where we are. We don't have even a documented standard of what do we consider our common base of shared functionality between the front ends that we have. So I think the first step is figuring out where we are. And that's where I think the test suite is awesome, because it's really highlighting here is a published standard, and here where we are in relation to it, and which of these changes do we want, which of these changes do we consider bugs, which of these changes are in line with the standard out there. And so figuring out where we are and then making the differences intentional, I think, is the first step. And then figuring out, okay, what do we want to change from here? Do we want to adopt GitHub flavored Markdown? Maybe there's an assumption that we've already adopted GitHub flavored Markdown in some ways, like we support tables and whatnot. Let's just make it intentional what we've already done.
So if you started from the other side, what if we were just designing this, it sort of seems like what we want is GitHub flavored Markdown, but with the ability to add things like IDs, because we use that in the application for, say, commands, and also with LaTeX support. Like if you told someone that's what Jupyter offers, they might already think that's what we offer today. I mean, we don't, right? Because the task list, for example, we don't support. But I don't think people would be shocked if you described it as what Jupyter offers. So yeah, I think if we picked something like GFM as the base, then there will also be multiple languages worth of tools that support it. There will be front end, and there will be Python things that support it, presumably. I don't know. Other people, what are you folks thinking? Yes, that's what William just said in the chat is accurate, I believe.
Yeah, I think that assessment is right. GFM is kind of the basic features that most of the users are expecting nowadays, I think. Only
people using GitHub, I think. Like there's a lot of people in the world that don't use GitHub and use notebooks.
Yeah, that's true. And that again gets to the point, like, why even push Markdown as the last thing? Because it's this lingua franca that gets implemented in a bunch of places. They're like, the social sites don't really, I don't care about the social site. You know what, forget about them. I don't care. The point is for, semi-technical typesetting, you need something that is not quite HTML, right? I mean, I think that maybe the thing that we would have is not rather worry so much about the input, but have a formatter, right? So if we had a formatter / linter that we could run on the front end and the back end, right? And again, we're not like, this is not a parser for the thing, but if we could make some comments about the well-formedness of the input, right? Because Markdown does not. Markdown makes no claims about, what your thing goes into it. It's gonna keep working. It might render it wrong, but it's not gonna fail. So, if there was, I don't know. I don't even know how to. I don't know how to effectively talk about it. I think we should support as much as Markdown as we can, because the more things that we do that move away from that reduce our ability to use our own tools to help build Jupyter tools. So from my perspective, like if we can slam out something in a notebook and then paste it into the README on GitHub, and that's the documentation that people land on, I want that. You know, I don't want us to have to relearn another diagram syntax in order to document what Jupyter's doing. And, you know, or adopt some big old desktop application when a quick mermaid would do the job. So there's no such thing as invalid Markdown. That's right. It can't be wrong. It is by definition correct, because when it falls back, it just falls back to plain text, you know, theoretically. But tell that to somebody that has spent hours working around our rendering bugs, making something look a particular way inside of Notebook Classic, and then they get angry when it doesn't work exactly that way with their custom CSS that they patch, you know, with some PowerShell script, or, you know, like the insanity of making a claim about the DOM architecture that comes out. Like DOM, we could do. We could say this is Jupyter DOM. That's a thing. But once you get inside of that Markdown cell, I don't think we can. I don't know how to make it any better. And I think we could evaluate it from the accessibility perspective, right? You know, is all of the stuff that's going into it generating good stuff? But we already know, for example, that Markdown cells do not naturally create document sections, which is what you would expect an accessible document to give you. So if you go to you know, the table of contents in a generated PDF that you download from a government website, those sections are actually like marked inside of there so that your screen reader can actually go in and tell you this header belongs to that section. And you cannot do that in Markdown. So according to whom? Like, I mean, yeah, a defined standard, I don't know. Yeah, you can define it, but then people want to extend it, and we can't take that away from them. It's way too useful.
The thing also is like the test suite like that I've used is really, it's a lot of tests, and they are really tricky one. So one question that we may have is like, are our user, like, do our user use that kind of very tricky Markdown, or do we want to just have a test suite that's fulfilling simple stuff? Like, because the test suite, like most of the errors you will see is like when you use tabulation, tabulation maybe transform in space or not in space or stuff like that. That's the kind of thing the test suite is testing. And it's maybe something we don't care so much as to say, okay, those tests are tests that we want to render in that way, and that's fine if they're not exactly that, like, because you have used space instead of tabs. And so maybe like the first step would be to really define what the test suite we want to fit, and maybe it's not like that very long list of tests for common mark.
But I think we have so many people, I guarantee that somebody's using every corner case out there. Well, okay, the assumption is that many people, many times you'll find somebody using a corner case. And so then the question is, what happens when we break the spacebar heating? You know, is it on them or is it on us to fix that? And if there's no defined, it's not a clear responsibility for us in API compatibility and expectations around releases, et cetera, versus if we have a standard that we can say, like, this is what we support, then it becomes much clearer.
Yeah, but then we are definitely going in the direction William was saying, that we may lock ourselves in a solution, and it's going to be very tough to change if we need to change in a couple of years. That's
where I really like that Common Mark has multiple implementations and a defined standard. And it doesn't cover all the use cases that we have, but it's a good base to start from, I think.
I think work for GitHub just because they have iterated so much with real users. They're like very user focused as a company. So I tend to think they might be a better model than Common Mark, because there's just a huge, millions of people using it and complaining, and then it gets better.
Yeah, true.
And at least they do specify it's GitHub favorite Markdown. Yeah, it's implemented in multiple places and it's reasonably well documented.
And we definitely want a couple of things in addition to it, right? So the failures that Fred showed us for things that we're adding, we need to add those things. We need some things to have IDs. We need some things to be accessible from the DOM nodes they're going to generate. And we need LaTeX support. Those things are not part of GFM.
So just to be clear, I think GFM is not based on Common Mark. Is that right? Is that correct?
It is.
The IETF draft that I posted said it was based on the original Markdown, not on Common Mark. That's my understanding. Or is that draft wrong or old or whatever? Is it explicitly based on Common Mark? Like, do they claim it to be compatible with Common Mark?
At least what I have seen was that it was built on top of it.
Okay.
Like compatible of the Common Mark test suite.
Well, that'd be fantastic, because then maybe it's just a superset of, maybe that's where we start instead of trying to figure out what the underlying Markdown recommendation is. Okay, thank you, William. Yes, this formal specification is based on Common Mark. Yep.
I looked at this for 10 seconds, but it seems to answer your question in the affirmative in 2017.
Good, okay. I think a good next step would be look at the test failures. Frederick, thanks for doing that work, and try to classify those failures as unintentional, i.e. we should find an implementation that fixes those or acknowledge those as bugs. Intentional, where we can have a debate about, do we want to keep this as part of the standard? And obviously passing, do we want to keep those as passing, the passing test as passing?
And then first focusing on the web render, and then we'll deal with how to align NB convert and the web render.
Sure, yeah.
That sounds like a good plan for me.
And I think it doesn't just have to be you, Frederick. Like,
I appreciate any help as anybody.
If you want to organize, like, happy to have a separate meeting where we just put all the test cases into this huge table and say, is this intentional? Is this a bug? Etc.
But I can at least try to generate that file, and so.
We have a Jupyter sub-project. Let me find what the official name of it is. Jupyter Standards. And we have a member of the Jupyter Standards sub-project on this call, I believe, Jason. Do you think this can end up being part of the Jupyter standard, like a thing, a document or repo, something that we can point people to and say, here we go, we thought it through. This isn't a spec, but it's a functional definition or something.
Yeah, I hope that's where this is headed, is a JEP that, or a project or whatever that gets encoded just like the kernel protocol, just like the, the notebook format. It's part of the notebook format, really. Yeah, I hope that's where this is headed.
Okay, there's 5 minutes left. I'm going to stop recording in case there's anything that somebody wanted to say at the end of the call.